Hello everyone, and welcome to this video, which is in our Human Game series, and we are continuing our look at the Oxford versus Cambridge Varsity match that took place a couple of weeks ago. Very exciting match. Nerve-jangling, ended in a 4-4 draw. We're taking a look at the board 1 matchup, and that's Tom O'Gorman against Miroslav Mako. Before the match, I'd predicted that Cambridge would really want to get white on odds, but they confounded me by taking black on odds. But they did lose boards 1 and board 3. So although I don't think you can argue with the result, I think the strategy paid off. Obviously, it was pretty high risk, and a few things went wrong as well. And I sort of thought that Miroslav would have a difficult time as black against Tom. Tom's much more in practice, I think, than most of the other players there. At least he's playing some Title Tuesdays, some Blitz games, tournaments, and that sort of thing. And also had quite a broad opening repertoire as well. So was able to play an awful lot of different positions. And I thought that would be quite a tough challenge on board 1 as black. I think for that game you'd rather have white. And it sort of turned out that way. Actually, in general, I think there were some pretty clever choices in the opening from the players, and I thought that this was one of them. As we will see, it was an Exchange Slav, so d4, d5, c4, c6, and now Tom took on d5. The Exchange Slav, it's a mixture of things, really. I mean, first of all, I'm not sure whether it's still the case, but just a little while back, it was the engine's favourite line against the Slav. They thought this was more promising than the Botvinnik or any of the super sharp stuff that you can get. It's also one of those things that's well, straight away it's kind of depressing. I mean, you're basically saying to black, I'm going to be a tempo up in a symmetrical position. The most that you can hope for, if you play well, is a draw. And I'm playing for 2 results, a win or a draw, and you're just playing for 1. And well, in a tense match, that's that's a pretty good way of playing, really. The other thing as well is it is actually quite tricky for black. If you don't know it really, really well, if you don't know your lines really, really well, it's very easy to get into trouble. And that was the case in my time as a professional, and I think it's still the case now. Obviously, black's found a lot of good ways of playing, but white's always coming up with new wrinkles as well. So knight c3 played. Actually, I think that's slightly inaccurate, because I've always thought that this version of the winner Gambit with e5 is not so bad for black, and definitely an interesting way of playing. I think normally they try and play bishop f4 straight away in order to avoid that possibility. But anyway, knight c3, knight f6 played, and now bishop f4. Knight c6, e3, and we're into the modern way of playing this. I mean, in the good old days, Ulf Andersson always used to put the knight to f3 very quickly, and played these positions countless number of times. Delaying the development of the knight to f3 means that you can also play plans with bishop d3, knight e2, for example, and then f3 and e4, or even g4, h4, something a little bit like a Jabava London system. So it just gives an awful lot of possibilities, and black's got to be a little bit careful here. Plenty of lines. Miroslav played the move a6, which is pretty common. Stops a white piece coming to b5, for example. Stops a plan like bishop b5 takes c6. Maybe going to expand on the queen side with b5. Maybe if you develop the light square bishop and the queen comes to b3, you can just play the cunning move rook a7 to defend b7. A move I first saw Grandmaster Julian Hodgson play many years ago. He was very much into a6 in the Slav. Well, Tom played bishop d3, and this stops the light square bishop from coming to f5. So here black's got a choice, and I think the normal choice nowadays is to play this move bishop g4. And if you go knight e2, then we play e6, and black's basically going to try and swap as much off as possible. Either light squared bishop in that way, or if you chase it away, it'll come back h5 to g6, and we'll try and exchange it for the light squared bishop. And then we'll play bishop d6, try and exchange off the dark squared bishops, and just try and hold there. And well, this was a game between Nisipiano and Grandelius in the Bundesliga 2022. I'm not sure, maybe the players were reasonably happy with the thought of a draw here. But you can see that that Black's playing this very, very sensibly, very nicely here somehow, and made a draw without very many problems. But it's quite subtle. Sometimes you see a game where Black's made a draw without any problems. You have a look at the engine, and the engine shows some little subtlety that could have led to a big advantage for White. So not easy to play. But Miroslav was spending quite a lot of time already at this stage. So I think that my impression is that the Slav was quite new for him. I hadn't seen any games of his with that. He was mostly playing Queen's Gambit declines, and think he was probably trying to piece together, what on earth was I supposed to play against this. So he played the move b5, which, in the commentary raised some eyebrows. It's just, when this sort of committal move, it isn't really necessary that early. That's the point. So when you do it this early, you give White plenty of time to set himself to exploit it. If you play other normal developing moves first and only later b5, then White will just have to deal with it with the development structure that he chose without it. But with b5, you can look at playing a rook to c1 early, even before castling, start putting pressure on the c file. It just makes it obvious much more early what White has to do. So in general, you should avoid those sort of moves in the opening. So Tom played knight f3 now. And the idea actually is, this is very good judgment in actual fact, because if Black plays b5, then bishop g4 is definitely going to be risky, because all of these light squares are weakened, and you really want your light squared bishop helping to deal with that. So now you can just play the knight to f3. If Black plays bishop g4, that should be very risky. Now we were expecting e6 in the commentary room, and you're going to play bishop b7, bishop d6. It's not so great, simply because you've got this weakness of the c5 square, and very easy for White to try and get a knight there, for example. The engines were holding it though. For example, after e6, this is a game between Ethereal and Leela. Ethereal is our guest engine for this analysis. An engine that was in the top 3 a number of years ago, fell away a little bit, but the programmer Andrew Grant has been making a real comeback, and it's getting really strong. I have to say that on my hardware, Ethereal's not much behind Leela, and even beating it in some series of matches as well. So very impressive, and I like its style very, very much as well. So bishop b7, knight e5, rook c8, takes. And we get this sort of position that, engines are quite happy to defend this for hundreds of moves. But in general, for human players, it's not super thrilling, not super nice, not a prospect that you particularly look forward to trying to hold this for ages and ages. And, Ethereal made some progress against Leela. I mean, these are the sort of positions that Leela holds very well. But, there's some good judgment at some stage when to strike back, when to try and gain some space. But in general, I wouldn't recommend this for a human player, to hold this. If you have to, you have to. But play something else earlier. But Miroslav played bishop g4, and Tom played very, very sensibly now, and got a good advantage. But actually, already the engines are saying that this is really, really critical already for Black, which is quite amazing. But that's what engines do. They're pointing out the resource rook c1. So it's what I said. Straight away, you've put these pawns very early on b5. White doesn't feel the need to castle, just starts attacking on the c file straight away. And knight takes b5, followed by rook takes c6 is a big threat. So queen b6 is natural, but now this move a4 is really strong. What's the problem? The problem is that if you play the move b4, which is what you'd really want to do, White has this idea knight b5. We're threatening knight c7 check, and if you take it, you might sort of think, bishop b5, bishop d7, maybe I'm going to survive here, but that's not the point. The point is rook takes c6 is happening, and if queen c6, bishop b5, very sneaky, very easy to miss. It certainly took me 30 seconds, a minute before I suddenly realised what the engine was on about. So yeah, I think an unusual and also happening much earlier than you might expect. So yeah, actually after a4, actually the engine is just wanting to give away a pawn straight away, and either bishop takes b5 or maybe go rook a1 first to improve it and invade on the a file. I mean, it's really absolutely horrific already after rook c1. So yeah, I mean, yeah, just shows really it's just mixing two ideas like that, b5 and then bishop g4. Yeah, it's even in an exchange Slav it can prove crucial. But Tom played h3, takes, and now the engine points out a clever idea for black here, which is to play knight b4 immediately. And the idea is that the bishop can't retreat back to e2, obviously, because knight c2 is dangerous. So the bishop has to go to b1, and now you go e6. And somehow that's shielding your b5 and a6 pawns from the pressure that we saw later in the game. And, well, after castles, bishop d6, the engine sort of thought that they'll sort of manage to survive this. I was getting lots of draws here between Ethereal and Leela here. So knight b4, very clever idea here, I think, to just to disrupt the harmony of White's development just for now, and then that should enable you to survive just a little bit better. But after e6, rook c1 was played. And now rook c8 from black. I seem to recall that yeah, I thought that the bishop d6 was maybe going to be a little bit better right now, just to try and exchange off bishops. And again, black is sort of surviving. But after rook c8, castles was played. I think you could also just play a4 here straight away, and if knight b4 will get queen e2 like in the game, and that'll be pretty strong. But castles is a pretty decent move. And now black played the move bishop e7. In the commentary room we were spending a lot of time at bishop d6, and yeah, knight b5 was what I was looking at. Actually quite tricky for black. If you take on f4, I just take back, takes, and this seems to be basically pretty much winning here, because after queen b6 you don't have to do anything complicated, but you just simply take everything and go queen b8 check and pick up the rook on h8. It reminds me very much of well, it's one of these enormous lessons that I'm always remembering nowadays. It's because when you I think as you become stronger, you start sometimes to automatically dismiss simpler lines. Especially when calculating, you always assume that something is going to be difficult. And I spent a lot of time looking at Tal's games at some stage, and I just sort of realised that the secret to Tal's attacks is that mostly he's either checking or he's capturing something. That was about 90% of the moves that he was playing, and a lot of them were based on very simple stuff. And instead of looking for something complicated, just have a look at the captures first of all and see whether it works. And this is a very good example. I mean, you could start having a look at all sorts of complicated things. How can I build up the pressure? And instead just a simple capture is winning. However, after a takes b5, that's not the case, because bishop b5, queen b6 is White's idea here, and yeah, you're not really getting the same sort of tactic at all. If you start capturing things, we just take with a rook, and then we can just block like this. So yeah, I mean, we were looking at bishop takes d6, queen takes b5, and then yeah, Ray Keane in the commentary was really keen on White's position. He really thought that that White would be virtually winning. I was much less keen. I thought actually that Black would most probably be better in this position, though I mean I didn't manage to show a concrete line that proved it. But I just didn't really believe White's attack was enough. And well, actually the engine is on my side, thank goodness. Yeah, I mean it's not easy, and you need some pretty good defense. But essentially, if you bring it all together, then yeah, then the engines were thinking that that White was actually going to be fine in this position. that black was going to be standing rather better in actual fact in this position. I think the games were ending up as now I'm seeing some wins. Ethereal beat Lila as black from this position. Lila beat Ethereal as well from black from this position. So yeah, looking like that sacrifice is not enough. What you can do for the engines wanted, and that caught me really by surprise, was just to play the move e4 in this position. Yeah, quite surprising in actual fact. That moves like knight takes d4 are too risky. That I understand. I think it's queen e3 in reply, and threatening all sorts of unpleasant things in the centre. But I was thinking that simply something like d takes e4. Why would this be so bad? But actually, the engines are just saying check and d5, rook d8 takes. And this position is just very, very difficult for black. If you take on e6, I go bishop b7, and it's kind of tough to get properly developed here without losing a pawn. Because moves like queen b6 allow queen a3 check. This is the big thing. And if you play queen takes e6, this move queen a3 and bishop b7, again proving very, very awkward. But I'm not sure. I don't know whether I'd have to be in really good form, I think, to assess that e4 and this follow-up is so good for white. Because just from the visual point of view, you don't really think that. I have to say, the engines wanted to play queen d8, but then takes rook e1 and queen f4 or a4, and the engines liked white's position very much here. And Lila was beating Ethereal here, and Ethereal was beating Lila. So when those sort of results happen, normally means that these are really good positions for white there. So bishop d6, that's the move you want to play, but you're probably now just a little bit too late. So bishop b7 was played by Miroslav, and now queen e2. That's actually quite a subtle move. A4 had been played before, but it gives, I guess, it gives black just a little bit more time there to defend everything. I mean, the knight comes round to d2, and then we're coming round into b3, and b3 didn't stretch far enough, and playing a5 and doubling on the c file. It's quite unpleasant. But queen e2 aims to be just a little bit more subtle, because after Miroslav castled a4, and now black's really just losing a pawn. You can't do anything about it. So yeah, I mean, we were trying to find the best way to lose a pawn, basically. I mean, that was the idea. And we'd been looking almost at ideas before. The idea is, should you try and leave white with a passed a pawn or a passed b pawn? He's definitely going to win a pawn. By now, it's kind of too late, and I think you just got to go for this position: takes, and queen b6. It's not so bad. I mean, it's not easy for black. I mean, I wanted to give white an a pawn rather than a b pawn, because it's very hard for black to put any pressure on the b pawn, because we've got this stunning bishop on f4, and this knight on b5 is stopping you from challenging any of those diagonals. But again, my engines were winning some of these games. I'm seeing a win here for Ethereal, but Ethereal also drew a game against Lila here. Obviously, much the better of it, but still, possible. And Lila was drawing some games against Ethereal here as well. So basically, it was 50%, but maybe 65% end score here against really good defense. So yeah, maybe this was this was probably the best thing that you could do. Just give up the pawn, and then just try and survive. I mean, let's have a look at a Lila Ethereal game: Rook c7, Rook e8, Bishop e5, Bishop f8. Not afraid of the double pawns. Rook c2, g3, Knight c3, Rook c8. Rook d1, Queen e2. Yeah, and white's still a pawn up, ruined the kingside pawns a little bit, but still, are you really? How easy is it going to be to make progress? Not going to be easy to push that b pawn. Lots of different plans played by the engine. So this plan of taking the knight is not the only one, but that would definitely have been the best line. But of course, from an early stage, black is just playing for a draw maximum. And chances of achieving it are not fantastic, so very hard situation psychologically to get in. But b4 was definitely worse there, I think, because actually, once white wins this a pawn, and it's inevitable because after a5, bishop a6 just wins the exchange. After you win the a pawn, there's still going to be a weak pawn on b4, and plenty of weak squares for white to aim for. So essentially you've accepted the loss of a pawn, but you haven't got rid of most of your queenside weaknesses, and that turns out very bad. Miroslav played bishop d6, takes bishop a6, and then Tom converted this very efficiently, actually. Knight b3, bishop b5, bishop d3, a little shimmy, but it doesn't really matter. Ended up taking off the knight and then inserting this rook onto c5. And Miroslav tried to break out, but just too many weaknesses all the time everywhere. And d5 is obviously weak, but b4 is also weak. This knight on c6 can't move. And after takes, it was just a question of mopping up, and a few moves later Tom had won to give Oxford their first point. So there we are. I mean, I thought that was very, very interesting. I thought it was an excellent choice from Tom, understanding that his opponent, wasn't a natural Slav player, and then choosing a line that that sets a lot of practical difficulties and doesn't really give black much opportunity to display talent or attacking flair or anything. You've just really got to know your lines and remember them and execute them, and then you'll hold. As you saw, it's not easy to make up as you go along, and somehow Miroslav got his lines mixed up. And Tom had an even more powerful possibility, but what he did was simply very, very sensible, and just lined up on those light squares. Tom was playing very, very quickly here. Miroslav was spending lots of time, and after 14 moves, without having done anything that looks so terrible, black's just losing a pawn and most likely the game. Very, very interesting. And I think both Tom and Ashvin on board 3, I think they got they really judged very nicely how to play as white in this sort of tense, crucial match, to give themselves few chances of losing and only chances of winning or drawing, and putting the pressure on the black player to play accurately right from the start. And I think that proved to be a very fruitful way of playing on those top 2 white boards for Oxford. Well, there we are. Hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to carry on with some more games. Lots of interesting episodes to see from many of the games, and we've still got the fantastic board 2 game and the attack, the winning brilliancy prize to see as well. If you enjoyed the video, why not give a like, subscribe to the channel, take a look at my new book, Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, or the Chessable course, which I think is maybe even better. And otherwise, thanks very much for watching, and hope to see you at the next video. Thanks for watching.